Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Football History Podcast. My name is Nick Hartz. We live in the age of FIFA 21, Football Manager, and every major sport from NFL, NBA, Formula One having their own video games represented in what has become a vast and lucrative industry. But bouncing back with an unlikely, some might think, World Cup bid is a much-loved game from the past for gentlemen of a certain age. And joining me on the show is another gentleman of a certain age, Mr. Neil Andrews, football writer and Cebutio aficionado. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Cheers, Nick. I should also add added collector of Cebutio teams.
It's a wonderful game. I actually bought my nephew for Christmas Cebutio. He's 14, so he's of the age of FIFA this and for every version of the video game that comes out. And I thought I'm going to buy him Cebutio because it's enjoying a bit of a resurgence at the moment, Neil. And it's quite interesting. I mean, one of the beauties of doing shows like this is you read about the unlikeliest histories, and on Wikipedia there's a wonderful history of Cebutio. It goes back a long way, doesn't it? I mean, post-war. I mean, created by a chap called Peter Adolf.
It actually goes back further. Peter Adolf did the Cebutio table football. There was another version called New Footy, which preceded it by about 20 years. It was done by two brothers in their house in Liverpool. Similar start to actually Cebutio, but the thing was they never patented it. And as a result, when Peter Adolf came along with his version, and he was unaware of New Footy, to be fair, they couldn't really do anything. So they had no recourse for legal action, and they did eventually patent their game, but obviously it was too late. But if you look at the players, the early players in the early teams, there's some similarities, except in the way the basics were and some of the rules. It was more like shove eightpenny, kind of like that pub game. But you still had that kind of flick to kick mentality. But they both started as pretty much cottage industries. It
occurs to me that I think anyone listening to this show will be gentlemen of a certain age, almost certainly. But it occurs to me that we may get some younger listeners, so we should probably explain what Cebutio is. I loved this game as a kid and still do actually. But it was a football game. They did have other versions, didn't they? They had versions of cricket and rugby.
They had cricket rugby, which had this great thing where you put the ball in and it would shoot out. They had hockey, speedway,
angling,
angling, snooker. They also had a game. Apparently, the snooker one was terrible, but they also had a game called Journey into Space, which had kind of Cebutio figures. You flicked off a balloon and you went to the planet. And they also did collector sets, so they kind of did a Beatles Cebutio. Not on the bases, not flick to kick, but it came in kind of like a package. So. They did kind of try to diversify. I remember rugby was probably
rugby. I remember,
by hockey, but obviously cricket was kind of overtaken by Test match, which was kind of a slightly superior game. I've never actually played or seen the angling or speedway version, so I can't comment. I've seen pictures of the speedway version, and it looks interesting, I must admit. And it probably was of its age as well when speedway was popular in the UK.
Huge sport at the time, yeah.
Do you know the story of what happened when it started? So he started off in the back room of his mum's house. He had all this wire, he had some netting. The secret was the old army blankets. And the original set, just to kind of go off at a tangent, you didn't actually get the pitch. Well, you got the pitch.
No.
You got a piece of chalk you had to do yourself. Now, aficionados actually say it's the best pitch that's ever been created. I know they did AstroTurf, which is very popular because it's very rare these days. But you could actually mark out your own pitch according to the size of your table, which was the beauty of the
army blanket.
But he put an ad in the Boys' Own paper and didn't think it would get much, the odd reply. He went off to... Because he was an ornithologist, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting character, actually. RAF man in the war. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he went off to America to look at rare eggs, and his mother had to cable him frantically because she had £7,500 worth of postal orders that had arrived from kids wanting this game. And it took them 6 months to kind of fulfill the orders, the backlog. But that kind of put it on a different footing. So, it's a funny old story. And
fantastic.
That's where the name comes from as well.
Yeah, which I never knew. I mean, I'm just reading the Wikipedia page, and there's a great picture of a plaque to Peter Adolf, 1916 to 1994, inventor of Cebutio, and as you say rightly, an ornithologist. It's a strange combination, but he had his factory down there in Kent, in Tunbridge Wells, and it's one of those. It's a very British kind of idea that you use old wartime blankets and make another use out of them. It was very much of its time, and it's kind of make, do, and mend, and yet somehow you create something bigger than you might have anticipated at the start of it. But I can remember the version that I had actually had a pitch. I mean, you rolled it out. It's printed, and you could roll it out on, as we did, on our carpet. But I do remember, people telling me that they never used to come with the pitches, and how lucky we were to live in the era of Subbuteo pitches. But the players were. I mean, it was a tremendous invention, really, because they were really well designed, weren't they? I mean, they were plastic. The main problem we had was that you could break them, and that was always a bit of a problem. So you'd finish up with multicoloured teams with other recruits from other sets that you might have. But the actual game itself was probably as close as you could get in table football terms to the real thing. I mean, that was the beauty of it, wasn't it? You could employ proper football tactics, styles of play.
Yeah, you could. So you could go 4-4-2, you could go 4-3-3,
4-3-3,
MW, whatever it was called. You could do whatever you wanted. There were certain rules, obviously. You could only shoot beyond the kind of what was the 20-yard line, theoretically.
Yeah.
But I think the real reason why it was so successful was the attention to detail. Now, I know everyone laughs about the to quote Half-Man Biscuit, the accessories for that big match atmosphere. But you had the stadium, you had the TV, being a Millwall fan, obviously you had the riot police as well and the fences, the atmosphere, and etc. But it was
writing spectators as well. I think they had one thing.
Eventually they produced over 750 different types of kit. Over 30 different types of ball, 25 different types of net, and there were 7 different fan poses. So it was that attention to detail, I think, that made it the real winner. Because obviously you had rivals. You had ball games like Wembley. You had other kind of like Bobby Charlton soccer. You had that one where you kind of twist in the knobs at the end and it would kind of flick like a pinball style. But like you say, you could set up your tactics. You could pick your team. You could pick any team. You could pick the home kit, the away kit. You had a scoreboard, you could have a crowd, you could even have a record playing the crowd noises. It really did replicate. I know it's a cliche, that big match atmosphere.
I mean, as a kid, I suppose you have to stress that this video games they just started to be, a thing in my late kind of teens, I suppose. But this predated the video era, and one of the things that always stood out. I'm going to sound like a right old git now, listeners. I'm going to apologise, but is that you had to create your own world when you played Cebutio. I mean, I played with my brother, and you needed a league, so you'd have your teams. You had to do your own statistics. It was very much you had to make it happen yourself in a sense, rather than the rather passive quality, I think, that video games can do, because everything's laid on for you. The league table gets done, the top scorer gets told. With Cebutio, you had to make your own fantasy world, I suppose, which I think was part of its charm for me as a kid.
I think there's a lot of dependency on the computer games, because I've done articles on the history of computer games and the famous orange ball in the snow, trying to replicate on Cebutio on my pitch using my mum's flour and some sellotape. Although now you can actually buy pitches that have snow on them or mud in the middle for even extra. But that kind of league basis that you're talking about. So if you had the Cebutio booklet or the catalogue or the rule book, they'll tell you how to play the league and how to do it and how to do cup competitions. And that kind of fed on to the early computer games, which probably was the killer for Cebutio, because you got games like Match Day come along, and then Match Day 2, which were kind of on the ZX Spectrum, which were kind of precursors of FIFA. And then you got actual soccer, etc., which took the Cebutio concept into a more vivid, real world for the kids coming up behind us. But at the height, I think it was like about 1980, there was over 7 million players of Cebutio worldwide. And like I said, it was 750 kits, so you could get your team no matter what. It was played in over 50 countries. The rulebook was available in 16 languages. It was a very, very big thing. But the numbers started to decline in the mid 80s. And I think part of the problem was that the love and attention of the kits started to go as well, which sounds really weird because that's when the kits started getting the sponsors and badges. But it wasn't the same because it was all printed. But it lost its main base. But it's ironic because although it's making a resurgence now, it's making a resurgence based on that kind of consistent stream that's been flowing since then, because leagues have still been going on. Subbuteo has still been played, since the 80s, just on a smaller scale. But like all things, people our age, people dust down, get in the loft, they find this Subbuteo, they start playing it, and then they suddenly realise they fancy playing in the league. So they ring up their mate from school and he goes, yeah, I'll have a game. And then all of a sudden it blossoms again. And so it is really taking off with adults of a certain age. And also kind of, people discover the game, who rediscover it, because you can still buy Cebutio. You've been able to buy
absolutely.
It
absolutely.
But, it has changed in terms of, it's always had this kind of professional element. So I always remember, reading an article 10 years ago where, they were talking about the latest Cebutio World Cup and how, these players, the professional players take floor polish and house polish with them to polish the bases and they can glide across the pitches a lot better. And you must remember this kid, the Italian kid, Andrea Piccalucca, I think it was, who won the World Cup around 1980. And he did a tour of the UK. I always remember this kid because he was at Wembley, took pictures on. But he ended up insuring his flicking finger for 150 grand.
Did he?
Because he was making so much money from this.
I remember something like that because this is one of the great sliding door moments of my life, listeners, when I must have been in my about 12 or 13, I reckon. And for reasons that I can't remember, I'd applied to go to a tournament, and it might have been in Gillingham, actually, which seemed like a long way away from where we lived in Nottingham. I didn't really know where Gillingham was, other than the fact it was a long way away. And they sent a reply back saying, yes, you can come to this Scoreboards tournament. And I was most excited at the thought of this. But then, as ever in this life, your enemy is the little voice in your head that says, how are you going to get there? What are you going to do? There's going to be loads of people there. And my bottle went, Neil. I didn't go to it in the end. And I was, it's one of those little moments in your life. Everyone comes across this kind of stuff at some point in their life. And I could have been that Piccalucca kid that would buy a finger insured for £150,000 or something. But it never happened. I didn't go. One of the regrets of my life. But yeah, I mean, there's an article, actually, I was just looking before we started speaking. There's an article in When Saturday Comes a few months ago about Scoreboards clubs popping up across the UK and trying to pull it together into some kind of national entity of some sort. I don't know how they're going to do it, but it's an amazingly enjoyable game. I mean, my nephew hadn't come across it in his life, loved it, because it's a physical thing, isn't it? It's not like the video screen games. You've got to play it. It's got action,
So I got my first set. So I always wanted Scoreboards as a kid, but woe is me, we were quite poor when I was a kid, and the sets were relatively expensive. And I always wanted Scoreboards, never got it. Asked it every birthday. And then my mum was walking past a second-hand shop, and in the window was this big cardboard box full of Scoreboards. And they came about with 13 teams, and I've still got the majority of those teams. Some are still in fine order, some still have glue, some have players missing. And they were kind of the old heavyweights. I'll move on to different.
Well, this was another thing, wasn't it? Yeah, this was the change of products.
I got that, but then I started buying my own, and I always kept the teams.
Yeah.
I had the England World Cup team from 1982, and I've only got 10 of those because my Alsatian dog ate one of them, ran in and ate one of the players. I've got a Brazil team from the same World Cup where one of them's got no head. So you had these kind of things, but I kept this, and then about 20 years ago, when I kind of first discovered eBay kind of thing, maybe a bit longer, I started finding the teams that I really wanted as a kid and started buying them with the intention of playing them with my son, and then realized there's a market for these old teams. And I realized that I had some teams that were worth quite a lot of money. And I realised that some teams were quite a lot of money, which would have been worth more money if my knee hadn't destroyed half of them. But it was kind of, it got to the point where I never played them with my son because we did play Scoreboards.
They were too valuable.
They were too valuable. And I always remember the shock and horror on my face when my youngest found my Cebutio, because I've got them all in a drawer. I've got about over 200 teams. And the Philadelphia Atoms. So it wasn't even team number one, which was red and white, but the Philadelphia Atoms. She got hold of them and bent them all back. And it's
mate.
Oh my God.
There we are. Just looking this, Neil sent me a link to it's eBay. And as you say, Neil, I mean, these are called heavyweights. I suppose we should just explain that these were the kind of the classic era Scoreboards teams. The base of the player had weight to it. I mean, that's, the name says what it is.
Not quite. So there's actually 10 different types of Scoreboards team.
Right.
Wow. The first one in the first set, they were called cardboard flats. So they're basically cardboard figures, and they were on button bases. And Peter Adolph bought these buttons from Woolworths, cut them down, and weighted them with a lead washer so they wouldn't fall over. But then he kind of went to the next thing, because you had to cut these cardboard figures out very carefully with scissors.
So these were little cardboard men stuck on top of that heavy base. Yeah.
Then they produced the perforated ones, so it looked like they had kind of like a bubble around them. But then they moved on to kind of what was known as celluloid flats, so kind of like plastic. Now these are the most expensive. If you ever come across any of these, you know, in a charity shop for a couple of quid, you could sell them for hundreds online.
Right.
After that's when you then move on to the more traditional bases. So the first one was the heavyweight V-neck, and it's called the heavyweight V-neck because they were all hand painted, and they had a V-neck, and they all had T-shirts rather than long sleeves.
Well, this would be the era that I remember. Yeah, okay.
Not quite. So this is 50. Oh. So it's kind of with the bar. After that, they produced one called the Walker, where the feet were kind of embedded into the base. I've got one of these teams actually. They weren't around for long because then they went on to the heavyweight, the one you're familiar with the bar across. Okay. And the traditional Cebutio stance. And these were the ones that were hand painted. So they're all hand painted here. And I think it was like they used to outsource the painting of the players, and if you were kind of an outsourced painter, you would paint on average 1,000 players a week. And in the 60s, you got paid, I think it was £2.12. In the 70s, it was about £7.50 a week to paint these figures. Wow. So each team was unique because they were hand painted. But the heavyweights are the ones with the bar across, which lasted till the early 70s, and then they moved what's known as a zombie because of the stance. Wow. The zombie had this kind of it kind of differed in terms of the characteristics of the figure. It wasn't so detailed. So it was the first time kind of like really, produced in a kind of mold kind of thing. And they had a particular look where their arms kind of hand out, and they could come in a bar or what became that kind of base. So the lightweights, which followed, were kind of the ones with the kind of round base that went into the middle. And they were the ones you saw in the early 80s. And the first lot of hand lightweights were hand painted, and then they became machine printed. And you notice the difference straight off the bat. So things like the England team in 1982 were machine printed, things like that. But the one they always had the problem with was Wycombe Wanderers, because it was always a white figure. And because they had the different blue quarters, they still had problems with that. But after the lightweight machine painted, they went to the lightweight one-piece base, which is kind of the more modern style, and the last one is kind of the professional base. So it's kind of a smaller, rounder base. It's the one you see in these clubs now. It's the one they play with that they kind of get going. But the ones that are the really interesting ones are the heavyweight zombies and lightweights. You rarely get the heavyweight V-necks, the celluloids, etc. The reason why the heavyweights and the zombies and that are so worth much because they put so much attention into these teams, and because kits varied so much, they're worth a lot more. So, like the old West Ham kit with the chevrons, that's worth a bit of money. It's worth about £10-20. But I had Hamilton Academicals with the red and white stripes, black shorts, and I sent you the link. That goes for £185.
I'm just looking at it. Yeah.
Full coat goes for about £50. If you've got any of the NASL teams, you'll get at least £30-40 for them. And even someone like Bristol Rovers. So I had Bristol Rovers heavyweight set. And here's an anecdote for you. I had a full set, perfect condition, and I gave it away to a school friend when we had Scoreboards leagues at school because he didn't have a team. And that school friend was Simon Beck, the Premier League referee. And every time I see Bristol Rovers, I think, Bloody hell!
You got my Cebutio team.
That's worth £21 now on eBay. But so you get teams like Zaire, for example, who came out in '74, and then after they disappeared, you never got Zaire again. That's very rare, very rare. But it's an interesting sign of the times in that all the South American teams had black players, and all the African teams had black players. Even though in Argentina they rarely had black players, kind of thing. It was kind of that. Should we say, not stereotype as such, but it was easy to do a team all one colour because it was all hand painted, but then when they did Milchester Rovers, they always had one player with blonde hair, so you knew that was Roy Race.
That was Roy Race.
The first kind of. But then later on, you started getting the printed badges, you started getting the ads, etc. And you could tell they were printed. But yes, I am, before anyone asks, the proud owner of a Dukla Prague away shirt as well.
I mean, I think
I do keep
right.
it on.
I had, the Cebutio kit used to come with one team wearing red shirts and white shorts, and one team with blue shirts and white shorts. So you had you could have a game, and then as you say, the catalogue was a thing of some fascination to me, because I keep having to stress to any younger listeners that this was an era where you just didn't see teams that often from abroad. So you would get all the colour combinations. I remember Anderlecht, I think, playing mauve, and I've never seen any team playing in mauve shirts in this country. And then you get exotic, as they seem to me, club names. Colo Colo, I think they're a Chilean side, and they'd have their colour. The attention to detail, the quality of the paintwork. I had, for some reason, I bought, I think I just like the green and black striped shirts, the Coventry City's away kit.
Yeah, I've got that as well.
Green and black. But the stripes were really delicately painted. I mean, these were very small figurines, and to get that so it looked authentic must have been intensely detailed work. I mean, to paint that on would require the patience of a saint. I mean, I know that the people are doing it for money, but the detail really made it something special, and the lengths to which they would go to get it right. Because I remember the famous Peruvian white shirts with a red diagonal band being one of the kits that you could buy, and that was just magic, Neil. That was the magic of it.
I've got 3 Peru teams, so I've got a lightweight and I've got 2 heavyweights, and the reason why I've got 2 heavyweights is they've got different bases. So it's like even kind of small nuances like that. But you're right. But the other thing was that they used to do these wall charts, and these wall charts are a work of art, and that you had the entire catalogue. And they've all got numbers. So if you were blue and white, you'd be Millwall, Everton, and Peterborough United kind of thing. But like you say, if you're Peru, that was bespoke. Sweden was bespoke, pretty much. Wycombe Wanderers we mentioned, but they would then list the team names underneath. So if you were a real football geek, like we are, you could learn that there was a team in Italy that played in a pink shirt. So when anyone in the school said no one ever played in pink, you go,
they do.
And brown shirts as well. I know Coventry played in brown, but there was, like you said, there's a real kind of attention to detail. But they started doing away kits as well, like you said, with Coventry City. You could actually get sets of the home nations that would come in different boxes as well. So England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, and they'd come in their own bespoke boxes. I think they did that for Jubilee actually. But it was, like you say, it was just the intention, detail, and the love as well. You knew you were getting a product that was loved. But I think when Waddington's, bought it for the equivalent of 2 million. And then Waddington's was bought for the equivalent of 57 million. But once it went to Waddington's, it lost that kind of cottage industry feel, I think. It had to be mass produced. You're selling over 1 million sets a year, which they were in the UK in the mid-70s kind of thing. You're kind of got to keep up with supply and not repeat the mistakes of the past when you got to fly back to fulfill your postal orders. But, it's kind of, people always talk about album covers, and works of art. But if you look at some of these Subbuteo teams, they are really hard works of art. You look at Tampa Bay Rowdies and you think, wow, that someone put a lot of time and effort into that. And, it's kind of, just to look at the teams in the boxes, it's it really is a nice thing to look at.
I'm just looking at the link you sent me, the eBay. I'm just looking at the Hamilton Academicals listeners who play in red and white hooped shirts with black shorts. It's, it's delicate paintwork that's gone into this. I mean, it is a toy. It was there to. I mean, I think I must have crushed a couple of my Coventry City team in my time, because it's a kids' game, so therefore it's there to be used and played with. But this one has come down the ages, preserved. £180 this chap is asking for it, and I dare say, looking at the other prices on the other ones here, there's one from Motherwell here, Neil, and other teams here, Liverpool, I'm seeing. I dare say that's the kind of range he'll get for this particular set. And
you've got to be careful of fakes, though. So a lot of people can't started paying figures, and sometimes it's worth paying for, because they've gone to detail. Sometimes, they've used gloss paint instead of matte paint, or sometimes they've put in, I remember getting a Blackburn Rovers team once, and everyone was bidding on it because it had the wire goalie, because the goalie was on a wire instead of a piece of plastic.
That was the version I had. The first one I had was a wire goalkeeper, which you fitted on the end of the piece of wire. And then I'm seeing
this wasn't genuine, because the Blackburn team had 3 black players in, which never happened with the wire goalkeepers. However, the reason why I got it was I needed a wire goalkeeper. It was cheaper than buying a wire goalkeeper.
I mean, just to explain, there was the wire goalkeeper. It was literally a bit of wire, which you then put into a small hole in the back of your goalkeeper, who was in a long stretching diving pose. Later that became a plastic one piece kind of unit, which I'm just looking at the Hamilton side that I've mentioned earlier on, has that plastic goalkeeper kind of arrangement. I mean, they would also produce and there's a kid, this was the beauty of it was the detail, as we've said a few times, but I had a small version of the European Cup, which we would it was the cup that you played for. It was FA Cup, did as a League Cup Championship trophy.
The FA Cup,
the FA Cup. So we had a European Cup, and I mean it was a replica of the very small, a couple of inches high, small replica of the European Cup. And scoreboards, Neil. I mean, you mentioned the scoreboards, stuff like that, and the fencing around the edge. I mean, we didn't have a lot of that, and you could get floodlights, which we never had. But I remember the other thing my dad got us for Christmas. It was a 5-a-side version, like a very heavy duty cardboard 5-a-side futsal, I suppose you call it now, but 5-a-side in my time.
I think they called it Football Express.
Football Express, and it had curved edges. The goals were built into a very hard, very heavy duty cardboard thing with a kind of like I think it was meant to be like an AstroTurf type of surface. And you could play it with just 5 players, which meant you could recycle any of your old broken teams and get a team out on that. And you could rebound it off the walls. Great game. Great game.
I loved it. They rebranded it in '82 with Sport Billy. Remember the Sport Billy 1980 mascot?
Oh yeah. The Spain, yeah.
Was it 1980? One of the two. They did that and recycled that game for it. But the scoreboard, I'll tell you what, cutting out all those different teams, because that scoreboard was actually, although it only went up to 9. So if Yugoslavia playing, Zaire, you could go 9-0, etc. But
yeah.
You could never do Hungary, El Salvador, unfortunately. But the sheets were, it came with all 92 English clubs, it came with all the Scottish clubs, and then it came with all the major international teams that were kind of in that year's World Cup, as well as kind of Northern Ireland, Wales, etc. All, as I said, home nations, and all the big European nations. You cut that out, so you could actually pick your teams and put it on the scoreboard and I remember I never had the floodlights until later, when someone gave me some as kind of a job because they were getting rid of them, and they weren't very good. You put the
no, they weren't. No.
Like, they would kill your batteries in next to no time. But the crowd, the stadium was good to a certain point.
To a certain degree, you
couldn't lean over. You couldn't lean over to flick if you had the entire stadium. That was the problem.
A mate of mine had floodlights. I think he had a section of crowd, but it was that. It looks great. I mean, from time to time on social media, you'll see pictures where people have set up a pristine 4 floodlights, crowd all around 4 sides. Some of them, there was the humour of the rioting crowd and the policemen, all that kind of thing. So it looks great in the photograph, but from a practical point of view, as a kid, you wouldn't play with that because it just got in the way, and you wanted to play the game. That was the thing. And as you say, the floodlights weren't terribly good, so you'd put your main front room. Like, we used to play sprawled across our front room floor. I used to annoy my dad no end because we'd have the whole pitch laid out on the carpet, and our front room carpet gave a particularly pristine Wembley style in its heyday pitch. If we got slung out of the front room, we had to go in the hallway where the carpet wasn't such good quality out there, and it used to scuff up. So that we used to pretend that was like a bad pitch, just 1970s bad pitch.
My mum actually put it. So where she worked, she worked at the time the London College of Furniture, which no longer exists.
Okay.
It's part of London Guildhall, I think now. But she got this big piece of chipboard, so quite thin.
Yeah, you could do that.
Stapled the pitch onto it, so I always had a flat surface, and what's more, I could carry it around quite easy. So I never had that problem with the thing. But I do remember when my cousin got it. My cousin got it in the early 90s, and I was called a very mean person because my cousin, everyone used to lose to my cousin. Yeah, I thumped him 10-0, and he started
10-0.
He rolled this out on my grand's floor, and that carpet was so good. But then he had to go, and I remember him leaving it there. And my gran got annoyed with something, and she had one of these art files, and she just threw it down right on top of the goal and just smashed the goal to smithereens. Said, "Oh, can you glue it together?" It's like, no, not really.
Talk about, I mean, the world for me divided into those that actually flicked it properly on the game and those that nudged it or used other. My brother was a terrible one for nudging it and kind of long runs, guided runs from deep. Where you basically you're pushing it. Pushing the player.
I remember being in the league at school, and it was between me and this other kid, and it was 0-0, and I got a throw in. I still dispute this today. I got this throw in. I'm going to take it. He took it and then scored. And it's like, what you doing? And we had this big argument over it, and it's like, right, I'm not interested.
That's it. Yeah, it normally turns into a row, doesn't it?
And like, the referee took off a few of my players for dissent. I lost 6-0. And so, and I was watching and said, that was, it's like typical school kid, argument where, his mate was referee and, they all thought it was a good laugh. And I remember him going on and on about it for a couple of days. And I think by the end of the week, I snapped and he started laughing. I just felled him with a left hook and he never mentioned it again.
That's the way to solve Cebutio disputes, which can get very heated. Great sport. I'm just looking at, as we're talking, I'm just looking at the article from WSC a few months ago. There were talk of a UK club league, all sorts of across the country. And it's great to see it. Certainly my nephew loves it. I think its beauty it remains the fact it's a physical game that you've got to play. You've got to engage with somebody else when you're playing it, rather than the essentially passive nature, I think, of many, many video games. I know that there are ways around that, but so really great to be able to give a nod to a big feature of my childhood, Neil. Cebutio. It's one of those fond memories from a long time ago. So great to see it making a bit of a comeback. Thank you to Neil Andrews with your evident love of Cebutio, and
I counted up last night. I've got about 8 sets in the loft. Very old. How
does Mrs. Andrews feel about this?
Well, they're in the loft, so it's not a problem. Yeah, outside, out of mind. But I do have one downstairs, and I keep saying to the kids who fancies the game of Scoreboards because I fancy playing it again. I do fancy, but I don't think I'll enter a competition or a league because I clearly do not have the temperament for it. And
no, I think that would turn into a Millwall row there.
If I throw a left hook now, I'll get arrested.
Big thank you, Neil Andrews. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Cheers, you're welcome.